The wedding guests heard the helicopter before they saw it. 300 people in their finest clothes turned from the flower-covered altar where James Thornhill stood with his bride-to-be, Diane. The afternoon sun made them squint as they searched the clear blue sky. James knew that sound. He recognized the black helicopter descending toward his family estate. The blood drained from his face. "Who is that?" Diane whispered, clutching his arm. The helicopter landed. A woman stepped out, elegant in a simple navy suit, but it was the two small children who emerged behind her that caused James's mother to gasp aloud. A boy and a girl, no older than 6, each holding one of the woman's hands. Children with James's eyes. "Catherine," James whispered, the name he hadn't spoken in 6 years. Catherine Morrison walked toward the wedding party, her head high. The twins looked around curiously, unaware they were the center of attention. "James," Catherine said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent garden, "I'd like you to meet your children." Before we continue, comment from where you are watching from. 6 years earlier, Catherine and James were the definition of a power couple. He was the brilliant heir to Thornhill Pharmaceuticals. She was a biochemist whose research had already saved countless lives. Their wedding had been the social event of the season, with vows exchanged in the same garden where James now stood with another woman. Their marriage seemed perfect, passionate, supportive, built on mutual respect. They traveled the world together, donated millions to charity, and were preparing to start a family. But behind the scenes, storm clouds were gathering. James's childhood friend Robert had joined Thornhill Pharmaceuticals as CFO, bringing his sister Diane into their social circle. What no one knew was how these two siblings would systematically destroy everything Catherine and James had built. The Thornhill estate glittered under the evening lights as waitstaff in crisp uniforms circulated through the annual charity gala. James watched his wife across the crowded ballroom, admiring how Catherine commanded attention in her emerald gown as she discussed her latest research with the health minister. "She's quite something," Robert said, appearing beside James with 2 whiskeys. "You're a lucky man." James accepted the drink with a smile. "Don't I know it? The clinical trials on her cancer treatment protocol are showing incredible results. The board is thrilled." Robert nodded, his eyes following Catherine as she laughed at something Diane said. "Must be nice having beauty and brains under one roof." "We're trying for a baby," James confided, the whiskey loosening his usual reserve. "Catherine's been tracking everything, says the timing is perfect this month." Robert's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Fatherhood, huh? That'll change everything." Later that night, Catherine stepped out of their ensuite bathroom to find James sitting on the edge of their bed, her phone in his hand. His face was unrecognizable, contorted with rage and betrayal. "James, what are you doing with my phone?" "Who is Michael?" His voice was dangerously quiet. Catherine's brow furrowed in confusion. "Michael? I don't know any." "Don't lie to me." He thrust the phone at her, displaying text messages she'd never seen before. Intimate messages, explicit plans for meetings. 3 months, Catherine. You've been seeing him in our bed while I was traveling for work." "James, I've never seen these messages before. I don't know any Michael." Her hands trembled as she scrolled through conversations that appeared to be from her number but contained words she'd never written. "Your perfume was on his clothes. He knew things about our house only someone who'd been here would know. James, these are fake. Someone planted these messages. I would never." The bedroom door opened and Robert entered without knocking. Security found these in her car. He handed James a small bag containing a man's watch and a hotel key card. "I've never seen those before," Catherine cried, reaching for James, who jerked away as if her touch would burn him. "Get out," James whispered. Then louder, "Get out of my house." "James, please. I'm your wife. I love you." Tears streamed down her face as Robert signaled to security guards waiting in the hallway. "Not anymore. I want divorce papers drafted tonight." "Already taken care of," Robert replied, not meeting Catherine's desperate gaze. The next moments passed in a horrific blur as security escorted Catherine from the bedroom. She begged James to listen. to think logically. Why would she cheat when they were trying for a baby? But rational thought had abandoned him, replaced by a primal rage fueled by what appeared to be irrefutable evidence. Within 30 minutes, Catherine found herself standing on the driveway in her nightgown, watching as staff threw hastily packed suitcases into the trunk of her car. James watched from the balcony, his face a stone mask, while Robert stood beside him, a hand on his shoulder in apparent consolation. "Your access cards have been deactivated," the head of security informed her coldly. "Your accounts will be frozen by morning. Mr. Thornhill suggests you don't try to contact him or anyone at the company." Rain began to fall as Catherine sat in her car, gasping for breath between sobs. Her phone buzzed with a notification, access to her email revoked. Then another, her building access terminated. Then a third, a preliminary notice of divorce proceedings. 5 miles from the estate, she pulled into a 24-hour pharmacy parking lot and sat trembling under the fluorescent lights. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some explanation. Someone had set her up, but who and why? Her mind immediately went to Robert's strange behavior over the past months, the way he seemed to appear whenever she and James disagreed, the subtle suggestions that she might be working too much or traveling too often. Then a wave of nausea hit her, a familiar sensation from the past few mornings that she'd attributed to stress. With shaking hands, she entered the pharmacy and purchased a pregnancy test. 3 minutes later, staring at the positive result in the pharmacy's sterile bathroom, Catherine Morrison's world completely collapsed. She was pregnant with James's child, homeless, and facing a vicious divorce orchestrated by someone she now suspected had been plotting this for months. As dawn broke, she parked near James's office building, determined to make him listen. But security intercepted her before she reached the door. "Mr. Thornhill doesn't want to see you, Mrs. Thornhill," the guard said, uncomfortable but firm. "Tell him I'm pregnant," she pleaded. "Please, just tell him that." The guard disappeared inside. 10 excruciating minutes later, he returned. "Mr. Thornhill says that given your infidelity, he has no reason to believe the child is his. His lawyer will contact you about a paternity test after the birth." Catherine's knees buckled at the cruelty of it. Through the glass doors, she could see Robert watching from the lobby, his expression unreadable. That afternoon, she discovered her credit cards had been canceled. By evening, her closest friends had stopped returning her calls, all part of the same social circle as James. By nightfall, she was sleeping in her car in a Walmart parking lot, 7 weeks pregnant and completely alone. She didn't know it yet, but the ultrasound she would have 2 weeks later would reveal an even greater shock. Twins. The first glimmer of hope came in the form of Margaret Ross, an elderly woman who found Catherine vomiting beside her car early one morning. "You're either pregnant or dying, dear," Margaret observed with startling directness. "Either way, you need help." Margaret, a widow who had lost her only daughter to cancer years before, offered Catherine her daughter's old room until she could sort things out. It was in Margaret's modest home that Catherine finally found space to think clearly about what had happened and to plan her response. She pawned her wedding ring for $112,000, a fraction of its value but enough for prenatal care and a used laptop. Then she began meticulously documenting everything that had occurred, creating timelines, saving what evidence she could salvage. The picture that emerged confirmed her suspicions. Robert, with Diane's help, had orchestrated her downfall. But why? What could they possibly gain? The answer came from an unexpected source. While browsing job listings at a coffee shop, Catherine overheard 2 pharmaceutical researchers discussing irregularities in Thornhill Pharmaceuticals' recent drug trial reports. "The numbers don't add up," one whispered. "The side effect profiles were clearly altered before submission." "Robert Thornhill signed off on everything," the other replied. "James Thornhill probably never even saw the original data." Catherine's scientific mind clicked into high gear. She had been working on those very trials before her expulsion. If Robert was falsifying data, that wasn't just fraud, it was dangerous. People could die, and if she had stayed, she might have discovered it. That night, cradling her growing belly, Catherine made a decision. James had failed her completely, choosing blind rage over trust. But she would not allow Robert's schemes to harm innocent people or to rob her children of their future. "Your daddy didn't want us," she whispered to her unborn twins, "but that's okay. We're going to build something so spectacular that one day he'll realize exactly what he threw away." Morning sickness was a cruel misnomer, Catherine discovered as she vomited for the third time that afternoon. At 4 months pregnant with twins, her body was changing rapidly, making it nearly impossible to conceal her condition during job interviews. "I'm sorry, Dr. Morrison," the lab director said, not meeting her eyes. "Your qualifications are impressive, but we've actually just filled the position." It was the same response she'd received at 5 other research facilities. Someone, almost certainly Robert, had blacklisted her throughout the industry. Margaret found her crying on the porch swing that evening. "Chin up, dear," the older woman said, lowering herself beside Catherine. "The world doesn't end because one man was too foolish to see your worth." "It's not just James," Catherine explained. "No one will hire me. My research experience means nothing when Robert Thornhill tells them I'm unstable or dishonest." Margaret considered this. "Then perhaps you need to meet people who've never heard of Robert Thornhill." The next day, Margaret drove Catherine to a small community clinic serving primarily low-income patients. The waiting room was packed, the staff overwhelmed. "My friend Dr. Rebecca Torres runs this place," Margaret explained. "She doesn't care about pharmaceutical politics, only about helping people." Dr. Torres was a hurricane in human form, a brilliant researcher who had left a prestigious position to serve those without access to adequate health care. After a 5-minute conversation about Catherine's research background, she offered her a part-time position analyzing patient data. "I can't pay you what you're worth," Dr. Torres warned, "and I see you're expecting twins." Catherine nodded, surprised. "The way you're carrying—" "Classic twin presentation," Dr. Torres explained. "Look, this isn't glamorous work, but it's honest, and no one here will judge you for being pregnant and unmarried if that's what you're worried about." For the first time in months, Catherine felt a flicker of hope. When can I start? The work was indeed unglamorous, organizing patient records, analyzing treatment outcomes, and helping streamline the clinic's protocols. But it kept Catherine's mind sharp and provided just enough income to supplement what she'd gotten from her wedding ring. At 7 months pregnant, she waddled into Dr. Torres's office with findings she couldn't ignore. "There's a pattern in these cancer patients," Catherine explained, spreading charts across the desk. "Those taking Thornhill Pharmaceuticals' new medication are showing liver complications at 3 times the reported rate." Dr. Torres studied the data. "This is concerning. You're certain?" "The sample size is small, but the pattern is unmistakable," Catherine confirmed. "And it matches what I overheard about falsified trial data." Dr. Torres's expression darkened. "We should report this to the FDA." "With what proof?" Catherine sighed. "They'll say our data set is too limited. We need more evidence." "What we need," Dr. Torres said thoughtfully, "is to develop an alternative treatment, something safer." Catherine blinked. "That would take years and millions in funding." "Not necessarily, Doctor." Torres smiled mysteriously. "I have a fully equipped lab at my home. It's where I conduct my own research after hours. Perhaps it's time you saw it." Dr. Torres's home lab turned out to be a state-of-the-art facility built in what had once been a large barn on her property. "My late husband left me quite comfortable," Dr. Torres explained. "I use my inheritance to fund research the big companies won't touch, treatments for rare diseases, affordable alternatives to expensive medications." Catherine ran her hand over the gleaming equipment. "This is incredible." "It's also private, Doctor," Torres emphasized. "No corporate oversight, no shareholders demanding quarterly profits at the expense of safety. Just pure science." She fixed Catherine with an intense gaze. "Your previous work on cancer treatment protocols was groundbreaking. What would you do if you had the freedom to continue that research your way?" The question awakened something in Catherine that had been dormant since her expulsion. the passionate researcher who had once believed she could change the world. 2 weeks later, Emily and Thomas Morrison entered the world in Dr. Torres's clinic, healthy, perfect, and blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding their birth. No birth announcement appeared in the papers. No proud father paced the waiting room. Just Margaret dabbing tears of joy as she held the newborns, and Dr. Torres who had delivered them herself. "They have his eyes," Margaret observed carefully. "Yes," Catherine agreed, studying her son's serious expression and her daughter's curious gaze. "But hopefully my common sense." Recovery from the birth was complicated by emotional exhaustion, but Catherine allowed herself only 2 weeks before returning to Dr. Torres's lab, often with the twins sleeping nearby in a portable crib. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, as Catherine refined her research, focusing on developing a cancer treatment with significantly fewer side effects than Thornhill Pharmaceuticals' flagship drug. When the twins were 8 months old, the breakthrough came. Catherine had created a compound that showed remarkable efficacy against aggressive cancers while maintaining a benign side effect profile. Dr. Torres was ecstatic. "This is extraordinary," she declared, reviewing the lab results. "You need to patent this immediately." "Patents require money," Catherine reminded her, "and lawyers." "Which I have," Dr. Torres countered. "But more importantly, this discovery deserves to reach patients. It needs a company behind it." Catherine laughed bitterly. What company would work with James Thornhill's discarded wife? Dr. Torres gave her a long, measured look. "A new one. One you create yourself." The idea seemed preposterous at first. Catherine had no business experience, no industry contacts, and barely enough money to cover diapers for the twins. But Dr. Torres was persistent, eventually revealing that she had been quietly investing in biotech startups for years. "I'm prepared to provide seed funding," she told Catherine. "My only conditions are that you maintain complete control and that the medications we develop remain affordable." "Why would you do this for me?" Catherine asked, suspicious of such generosity after months of betrayal. "Because 20 years ago, I was you," Dr. Torres answered simply. "Brilliant, betrayed, and underestimated. The man who did it to me went on to become a pharmaceutical giant, selling medications at 20 times their production cost. I've spent 2 decades looking for someone who could help me change that system." She smiled at the twins playing on a blanket nearby. "Consider it my investment in the next generation." Phoenix Pharmaceuticals was born in Dr. Torres's barn laboratory, with Catherine using her maiden name, Catherine Morrison, to avoid immediate association with Thornhill Pharmaceuticals. Their first patent application went through without a hitch. James and Robert remained completely unaware that their former colleague was building a rival company. By the time the twins turned 2, Phoenix had secured FDA approval for their first medication and had begun small-scale production. Dr. Torres's industry contacts proved invaluable, opening doors that would have remained firmly closed to Catherine alone. Their first major contract came from Mercy Hospital Network, which had been struggling with the high cost and concerning side effects of Thornhill Pharmaceuticals' cancer treatments. Phoenix offered an effective alternative at half the price, with significantly better patient outcomes. The announcement made small ripples in industry publications. Newcomer Phoenix Pharmaceuticals, led by scientist Catherine Morrison, secures multi-million-dollar contract with Mercy Hospital Network, challenging established players in the oncology medication market. At Thornhill Pharmaceuticals, the news received little attention. A new competitor was hardly unusual in their industry, and the company name raised no red flags. Only when their largest hospital client announced they were switching suppliers did alarms begin to sound. Robert Thornhill stormed into James's office, tossing a report onto his desk. "We just lost Metropolitan Medical to some startup called Phoenix. That's $30 million in annual revenue gone." James, now more involved in the social aspects of business than the scientific work that had once passioned him, barely looked up. "So, offer them a better deal." "I did," Robert snapped. "They refused. Said Phoenix's medication has superior outcomes and fewer side effects. Their exact words were, "Thornhill's product doesn't compare." This finally captured James's attention. "That's impossible. Our R&D team has been working on that formulation for years." "Well, apparently, this Catherine Morrison person solved in 2 years what our team couldn't manage in 5. Robert's tone was carefully calibrated to suggest incompetence rather than his own sabotage of Thornhill's research department after Catherine's departure. "Catherine Morrison?" James frowned, the name stirring something in his memory. "No one knows much about her," Robert continued smoothly. "She emerged from nowhere about 3 years ago. Very private, never gives interviews. But her science is apparently exceptional." "I want to meet her," James decided. "Set up a dinner. Perhaps we should consider acquiring Phoenix rather than competing with it." Robert's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll try, but my sources say she refuses most meeting requests, especially from larger pharmaceuticals." "Everyone has their price," James replied dismissively, returning to the social calendar on his desk where Diane had marked several charity galas they would attend together. Meanwhile, across the city, Catherine sat in Phoenix's modest but growing headquarters, reviewing their latest financial projections, while the twins colored quietly in her office's small play area. "Thornhill Pharmaceuticals lost another contract today," her assistant mentioned, placing fresh reports on her desk. "Their stock dropped 8%. Catherine allowed herself a small smile. How unfortunate for them. "There's also this," the assistant added, sliding over a business magazine. On the cover was James with Diane on his arm at a charity event. The headline read, "Thornhill heir to wed Diane Blackwell in spring ceremony." Catherine's expression remained neutral as she studied the image of the man who had thrown her out in the night, the man whose children were now quietly drawing pictures just feet away. Children he had never bothered to confirm were his, despite his initial demand for paternity testing. "Mom, look!" Emily held up a drawing of what appeared to be their small family. Catherine, Thomas, Emily, Margaret, and Dr. Torres all holding hands. "It's us." "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. Later that night, after tucking the twins into bed, Catherine sat on her balcony overlooking the city. In the distance, she could see the Thornhill Pharmaceuticals tower illuminated against the night sky. 3 years of strategic work had built Phoenix into a formidable competitor, one that was beginning to seriously impact Thornhill's bottom line. But that had never been her primary goal. Her phone chimed with a message from her investigator, a former patient whose life had been saved by Phoenix's medication and who now used his skills as a financial analyst to track Thornhill Pharmaceuticals' activities. "Found something significant in their quarterly filings. Hidden inconsistencies suggest at least $50 million unaccounted for. Need to dig deeper. Also, wedding date confirmed, May 15th. May 15th, the exact date, 6 years earlier, when security had escorted her from her home. Catherine closed her eyes. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Robert and Diane had a flair for psychological cruelty. Choosing that specific date was clearly meant as a final erasure of her existence in James's life. But they had miscalculated badly. Because while they had been planning a wedding, Catherine had been building an empire. And, more importantly, she had been gathering evidence of financial fraud, of deliberately concealed drug side effects, and of the elaborate scheme to frame her for infidelity. The twins deserved to know their father, Dr. Torres had told her repeatedly, and James deserves to know what Robert did. Catherine had resisted for years, protecting the peaceful world she'd created for her children. But seeing the wedding announcement planned for the anniversary of her greatest humiliation crystallized something within her. It was time for the truth to emerge. All of it. The Thornhill estate had never looked more magnificent. Thousands of white roses adorned the garden where 300 guests had gathered to witness the union of James Thornhill and Diane Blackwell. String musicians played softly as the guests were seated, their murmured conversations creating a gentle hum of anticipation. James stood at the altar, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, though close observers might note the slight hollow in his eyes. In the front row, his parents exchanged concerned glances. They had never fully warmed to Diane, though they'd kept their reservations private. Robert Thornhill, serving as best man, surveyed the scene with poorly concealed satisfaction. Everything had gone according to plan. Within months of Catherine's removal, he had introduced his sister to James. Her calculated affection had been the perfect distraction from James's occasional questions about the evidence against Catherine. Meanwhile, Robert had systematically redirected company funds, established offshore accounts, and positioned himself to eventually take control of Thornhill Pharmaceuticals entirely. The wedding officiant took his position. The music shifted to the bridal march. Diane appeared at the end of the aisle in a designer gown that had cost more than most people's homes. And then, the distant sound of helicopter blades. At first, guests assumed it was part of the celebration, perhaps an elaborate entrance or surprise planned by the groom. But James's expression of confusion quickly shifted to alarm as the black helicopter descended toward the estate's helipad. "What's happening?" Diane demanded, reaching the altar as the guests began to turn toward the noise. James didn't answer. Something about the helicopter seemed oddly familiar. The ceremony paused as the helicopter landed. Security personnel moved uncertainly toward the helipad, unsure whether to intervene. Then the door opened and she stepped out. Even from a distance, James recognized her immediately. The world seemed to narrow to a single point as Catherine, his ex-wife, the woman he had cast aside 6 years earlier, walked calmly toward the ceremony in an elegant navy suit. Her hair was different, her posture more confident, but her face stirred something deep within him that he had tried desperately to forget. Then 2 small figures emerged from the helicopter behind her, a boy and girl holding her hands, looking around with curious expressions that mirrored James's own when confronted with something new. "Oh my God," James's mother whispered, rising from her seat. "Richard, look at them." James's father stood as well, his face pale with shock. "They have his eyes." James's eyes. The murmurs spread through the crowd as Catherine and the children walked deliberately toward the ceremony. Security looked to James for direction, but he remained frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. "What is this?" Diane hissed, grabbing James's arm. "Who is that woman? Why is she here with those children?" Robert stepped forward, his face contorted with rage and fear. "I'll handle this." He signaled to security, but Catherine's calm voice cut through the chaos. "I wouldn't, Robert. Not unless you want your financial activities made public right now instead of in tomorrow's papers." Robert faltered as Catherine and the children reached the edge of the seating area. The twins, impeccably dressed and remarkably composed for their age, stayed close to their mother, studying the scene with intelligent eyes. "James," Catherine said, her voice carrying across the now silent gathering. "Meet your children, Emily and Thomas, the ones you never knew existed when you threw me out 6 years ago." The collective gasp from the guests was audible. James's mother pressed a hand to her mouth, tears filling her eyes as she looked at her grandchildren for the first time. "That's impossible," Diane snapped. "She's lying. James, tell everyone she's lying." But James couldn't speak. He was staring at the children, at the boy whose serious expression and thoughtful eyes were eerily familiar, at the girl whose determined stance mirrored his own in childhood photographs. "DNA tests confirming their paternity have already been filed with the family court," Catherine continued calmly, "along with evidence of how Robert and Diane conspired to remove me from your life by fabricating evidence of infidelity." Robert lunged forward. "Security, remove this woman immediately." "I wouldn't," came another voice as Dr. Rebecca Torres emerged from behind Catherine. "Not unless Thornhill Pharmaceuticals wants the FDA to receive our complete file on the falsified side effect profiles of Naxarol tonight instead of next week." The wedding ended in chaos. Federal agents arrested Robert and Diane for financial fraud. James's parents embraced their grandchildren with tears and wonder, and Catherine watched as the man who had once cast her out now faced the full consequences of his blind trust in the wrong people. 1 year later, Catherine stood in her office at the newly merged Phoenix Thornhill Pharmaceuticals. The view overlooked the city where she had once slept in her car, pregnant and alone. A knock at the door. James entered with the twins, returning from their weekend with their father. "Mom!" Emily rushed forward. "Dad took us sailing. I got to steer the boat." "That sounds wonderful." Catherine smiled, accepting her daughter's enthusiastic hug. "They're natural sailors," James said, a cautious warmth in his voice that had developed slowly over months of carefully supervised visits and gradual trust building. Thomas, ever thoughtful, studied his parents. "Are you two still friends now?" Catherine and James exchanged glances. So much history, pain, and slow healing between them. "Yes," Catherine answered honestly. "We're friends because we both love you and Emily very much." It wasn't the life she had planned, but as Phoenix Thornhill released its newest affordable cancer treatment to worldwide acclaim, as her children thrived with two parents in their lives, and as she built something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal, Catherine Morrison realized she wouldn't change a thing. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. Please do comment your feedback and subscribe to our channel for more unexpected stories. Remember, it's never too late to change your story.